the story reconciliation. And I think in communication, that's something we don't look at, is that we can disagree, but at the end of the day, we should realize that we're all moving towards a common goal. And we may approach it from different directions, but the important thing is not the disagreement. The important thing is that unified journey at the end.
By Billy J. Hamilton Jr., author of A Stranger in the Elemental Temple, The Rituals of the Ancient Order of Ishmael. This fascinating book unveils the never-before-published rituals of a mysterious Parramasonic order, tracing its history through biblical narratives and enigmatic figures like Kenneth Mackenzie and Wynne Westcott. With 36 degrees of intricate ceremonies, stunning illustrations, and a deep dive into a hidden tradition, Billy's work is a treasure for anyone curious about esoteric history. Let's explore the secrets of the Order of Ishmael and the journey behind bringing this lost system to light. Billy, thank you so much for being here, brother. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me, Briggs. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
It looks beautiful. It looks like the binding, the cover, looks like maybe gold leaf is on there as well.
Yeah, it's actually a silver leaf, and I have to credit Louis Masonic. Their design team did a fantastic job putting the work together. Yeah, and it's an honor, too, to be associated with the oldest Masonic publishing house in existence.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and get started here. I've got your first question for you.
Okay.
Your book reveals the unpublished rituals of the ancient Oriental Order of Ishmael. What sparked your interest in this obscure group, and how did you tackle researching its secretive history, especially with Kenneth Mackenzie's claims of mysterious origins? It looked like he said maybe a professor in France or an arch chancellor in Paris.
Yes. Yeah. So what sparked my interest in this is being a Freemason, having gone through both the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. And the York Rite, if you've received the Order of the Temple, right, the final degree in the Knight Templar Commandery, it's very focused on the Christian religion and our personal relationship with it. It's a beautiful, moving ceremony. What I found, though, is as I contemplated it, I'm like, well, this is fantastic, but it's limited only to Christian Masons. So is there anything out there similar for brethren of the Hebrew faith or the Islamic faith? And so I started looking for these other religious-based Masonic orders. So as I started doing research, of course, you go to Google, you start looking around. The first thing I found, and it's still kind of obscure, but the Order of Judas Maccabeus was an order that was put together focused on the Hebrew experience. And they have their own Order of the Temple. They've been trying to get recognition for the past 50 years or so and have not received recognition yet from the Grand Lodge in New York, which is where they're primarily based. So I'm like, okay, so that satisfies my question about Brethren of the Hebrew faith. So then I started looking I found a reference to an order of Brethren of the Hindu faith, supposedly. And this was the Order of Satbai, the Royal Masonic Order of Satbai. And what's interesting is this also is the same group of people in Ishmael. But so it's Kenneth Mackenzie, John Yarker was involved. And there's very little information on it, but supposedly is based in Hindu mysticism, right? So didn't really find much information on it. However, I know Grand College of Rites in one of their older books has, I believe, the 7 degrees are published by the Grand College of Rites. So then I found one line that referenced the Order of Ishmael, in that it was supposedly an Islamic-based order that was run by Kenneth Mackenzie. And so that was it, right? It was a mystery. It's like nothing was published on him. No other details were available. It was just a name, and so I kind of filed that away in the back of my mind. And about 2 years ago, my wife and I, for our anniversary every year, we usually try to go on a vacation together. And she's very forgiving in that usually I tie in some kind of Masonic research or whatever with our vacations. And so 2 years ago, we went to England. And I talked her into letting me spend a couple of days in the archives of the United Grand Lodge of England, there at the Museum of Freemasonry. And while I was there, I was looking up, William Westcott. I was interested in some of the foundational texts of the Golden Dawn, some, other orders that, that were related to the SRCF. And I decided, you know what, let me see if they have anything on Kenneth Mackenzie. And lo and behold, I found that they had 4 copies of handwritten ritual books for this order that I have been thinking about, many years previously. And so I put in a request, can I please, access this information? And so when I showed up, I requested so much information. I have 4 boxes of information. But I had also requested to see some Kenneth Mackenzie's personal correspondence. And I found that not only did the ritual books exist in different forms and such, and they were dated from 1872 to I think 1909 was the last one. So you're talking about a span of 37 years here where the ritual has kind of evolved. But they also had the correspondence between the members. And what was fascinating about that is you never really, in Masonic ritual, you usually see it coming forth fully formed like Athena springing forth from the head of Zeus, right? But in this case, you actually get to see a little bit of the sausage being made, right? And how they talked about promoting the order, developing the order. Some of the internal rivalries between members are some of the quarrels that were going on. And so in the back of my book, Stranger in the Elemental Temple, I actually included all the correspondence between the members that mentioned the Order of Ishmael or pertain to it particularly. So that's really how I came across this information.
So awesome that you got to show up over there and they just opened the gates to you. That's so good to hear. And, it allows other brothers out there to know you can do this too.
Oh, yeah.
If you find something, go searching in the quarries for it.
Actually, and if I may, I used to be the general manager of the Grand Lodge Library Museum of Texas. And so I got to be the custodian for the Grand Lodge of Texas archives. And a lot of times we want people to come in, right? As these managers of archives, we want people to study. We want people to learn. And so that was something when I was there, Pierre Mollier, who is, I believe he's the director of archives over the Grand Orient of France, happened to be visiting. And we had a chance to talk there in the Museum of Freemasonry in London. And we had the conversation about how much how much we enjoy seeing other people study, right? Come in and actually use the records. Because most of the time you can sit there for a whole day in some of these archives and nobody comes in. Sometimes it's a whole week, So really, I think archives want people to come in and take a look through the records because half the time they don't even know what they have. I know that's the way it was in Texas. Not to say that we didn't have, a lot of indexing, but you receive so much material that sometimes researchers coming in kind of help you understand what it is that you actually have in your own archives.
That's great news. That's great news. Question: the Order of Ishmael is built around the biblical story of Abraham, Ishmael, and their family, weaving themes of exile, trust, and reconciliation. As the first to publish these previously unpublished rituals, how did you approach organizing and presenting these as ancient narratives for a modern audience?
Okay, well, so these were written down in the Victorian age. As I said, there were 4 different, I guess you would say, ritual recensions, right? There are 4 different, most of the content was the same with some small variations. And so what I did was I took the one that seemed the most comprehensive was the second copy. And that was the one, it was dated 1872, but I have a feeling that was actually written down maybe a couple of years later by Francis George Irwin, who was the second head of the order. But even though he credits that it is the ritual of Kenneth Mackenzie, he puts that right on the title page. And so that was what I used as the basis for the ritual as you see in the book. But as I was going through, I would have all 4 copies up on the screen. Thankfully, I have a monitor that allows me to do that. And as I would go through, I'd look at, okay, so what is, the original one, which was a very hastily written, sometimes kind of hard to read, handwritten copy. I think it was the copy that Wynne made directly from Mackenzie's documents that, as he was transcribing it. And then later on, he came back and he put it together into the better copy that I was using as my primary source. But John Yarker in 1906 had written a typewritten copy. And so I compared it with his, and then William and Westcott had a copy as well. That was 1907. And so I really kind of looked at them and compared them. And there were some minor changes. Sometimes when there was some difference in the wording, I would actually kind of contemplate and wonder, which one of these best fits the theme or the tone of the narrative that we're trying to give. And so that's how really I had to do this. And my goal when I wrote this book was I wanted it to be a workable system that, and it's not recognized. It's not practiced anywhere. I know there's a Martinist group who's interested in running it.
I could see that.
There's a couple of Grand Lodges actually that have talked to me, so we'll see where that goes. But my goal was, if someone wanted to go through from beginning to end, that it would be in a comprehensive form that a group could actually sit through and run together. So that was really how I put it. And I'm not going to lie, being in the 1880s, there were some items that I had to take out. The second copy had this interesting, like, very ethnocentric, I guess would be the polite way. In one of the degrees, it had a very ethnocentric narrative where it talked about the origin of the pre-Diluvian races. And so looking at that, I was like, it doesn't really enhance the story. It's only appearing in this one copy. It doesn't appear in the other 3. So let's just leave that out. Yeah.
That's what broke the group up. No.
Well, and I understand it too. Sometimes when you look at things, you're like, well, that is, in light of the times, was that controversial? Yeah. And it's like, no, it wasn't. It was the prevalent dominant theory. And so it's like, I don't judge it, but it doesn't really add anything to it. So let's just leave that one section out since it doesn't appear anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was hoping for, that you put it together so that we could put it to work. Yeah. That is fantastic.
Yes.
That is fantastic. I'm looking forward to that.
I would love to see it actually practiced somewhere, because I know Mackenzie. So an interesting story about Mackenzie was his uncle. At the time he was active as a Mason and active with this order, his uncle, John Morant Hervey, was the Grand Secretary for the United Grand Lodge of England. And so what's interesting is that they never really made a push to make this into a Masonic body. They were okay with keeping it outside of Masonry. It's the impression I get based on their correspondence. But it would be interesting to see if it wasn't a Masonic body then. If it becomes a Masonic body now, it would be an interesting twist to the story, I think, of Ishmael, 140 years later.
And it was all there waiting for you. You know what I mean? And that's the nice thing is it was preserved. Mm-hmm. The progression of the order's leadership from Kenneth Mackenzie to William Wynne Westcott, a key figure in the Golden Dawn, suggests a blend of Masonic tradition and occult innovation. How do you think the Order of Ishmael influenced or was influenced by other esoteric movements of its time?
So Kenneth Mackenzie, the way that, so Francis George Irwin and Kenneth Mackenzie, when they got together, that was really what led to the explosion of the development of this order. And the thing that prompted Irwin to reach out to Mackenzie in the first place was he wrote an article for the SRIA's magazine that they had at the time, the Rosicrucian. And this would have been about 1872. And in that magazine article, Kenneth Mackenzie talks about visiting Eliphas Levi in Paris, right, and studying under him. And so that automatically, you know that there is a very esoteric bent to these individuals, right? Francis George Irwin was the chief adept of the Bristol College of the SRIA. So, right, John Yarker, I believe, was also a member of the SRA. And of course, Wynne Westcott was the chief adept he was the supreme magus, actually, of Metropolitan College. So right off the bat, just with the individuals associated with this, there's an element of Rosicrucianism that ties them together. Westcott doesn't really need an introduction. He is famous for the Golden Dawn. What's interesting, though, is he seems to be a late addition. I don't, based on the correspondence I've actually seen from Mackenzie, he didn't seem to have actually liked Westcott. And so it was after he passed away that I think Irwin and Yarker brought Westcott into the fold, and he becomes one of the key figures in this organization. But when you read through the books, what's interesting, if you notice in the first section, so it starts off with this order, or with Abraham, fleeing to Canaan and being taken in by this desert tribe. But in the third degree, there's like a switch to where all of a sudden it becomes an alchemical elemental brotherhood. All right. It's like, okay, so you're welcomed into this tribe, Abraham and his sons. So now we're going to tell you about the elemental temple, right? You are now going to become priests in this elemental priesthood. We're going to begin with fire, right? And talk about the ancient fire worshiping practices, and the gods and that have been associated with it in different cultures, and it's not meant to worship these other gods, but it's meant to give kind of a philosophical understanding of the transmutational nature of fire. And then in the next degree, it goes to water, then earth, then air. And then in the seventh degree, it brings it all together, companion of the elements, and it talks about balance, right? So balance was very key in Eliphas Levi's text, in Transcendental Magic. He talks about the need of balance. That influenced later Albert Pike, and you see it in Morals and Dogma. I mean, the 32nd degree is all about balance, and so you have now Rosicrucianism, you have alchemy, and so I think those were kind of some of the esoteric elements that brought these members together in this degree system. What's interesting, though, is after that ninth degree is probably the last one that really does with alchemy. And then you get into more of the biblical parables. It talks about the stories of, reconciliation between Ishmael and his brother, and Esau, and it gets into the stories of, after all of this infighting that has happened with Abraham's family, how they all come back together again. And then in the fourth section,
Bhagavad Gita.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the fourth section, though, becomes a series of knighthoods, and each one of them is based on a different philosopher. So now you're bringing in a philosophical element, and you have like the Chevalier of Plato, Chevalier of Solon, Alexander the Great, and it brings in the teachings of each of them in each of these different degrees. So I think those are some of the elements that brought these people together. It shows the esoteric nature while also being very kind of Masonic in that it does have a lot of biblical parables that help to demonstrate some of the teachings of the order.
Reconciliation between those two characters is huge on a world scale.
Yeah.
Wow. Just wondering if that's what they were. What else I find fascinating is, there's the keystone again, Eliphas. There he is.
Yeah.
There he is. I mean, he is, when you dig down in these writings, it always ends up with him. And I often wonder if this stems from when Napoleon, got him the Vatican archives, because I believe he translated a lot of that stuff, and that went into his brain. So that must have, really influenced a lot of this stuff, and him mailing stuff to Pike and, and all that stuff. I didn't know if you knew about that. Did you know about that?
I knew that he was, I believe it's Francis Barrett, who wrote, like the Magus. I know that he had traveled to England and they were close. But yeah, Eliphas Levi, actually, what's interesting is the way he gained a lot of, I have a presentation. It's about, I have about an hour-long presentation that I do about the life and development of Eliphas Levi. And what's interesting about him is that he started out wanting to be a priest, and so he went through seminary.
Yeah.
And while he was there, he had one of his earliest teachers in seminary, the Abbe Colonna, was he was in the Martinism and Mesmerism, and so that was kind of so at the time, Eliphas Levi would have been about 15, and he's exposed for the first time to these, Christian mystical teachings, and so what you'll see about Eliphas Levi is that he picks up a little bit. So after he leaves the seminary, he doesn't become a priesthood, or he doesn't join the priesthood. He becomes this socialist firebrand writer. He gets sent to prison. And while he's there, he reads the works of Emanuel Swedenborg, picking up even more mysticism. And so you see that Eliphas Levi kind of develops as this character throughout his life until he becomes this fully formed magus, right? And he dedicates his life to that after personal tragedy. But what's interesting is from that point, it's like he does become that nexus for the mid 1800s, right? I believe that he was key in keeping in the Rosicrucian Renaissance, if you were, because he wasn't just talking to the English Freemasons who formed the SRIA, or he's also talking to Clymer, who's here in the United States with a different form of Rosicrucianism. He's also instrumental in, Pappas actually said that he was a student of Levi and that there was a personal connection between them. And so that brings in the French, Rosicrucian tradition and Martinist tradition as well. And so it is interesting that Levi is this nexus, in the center of everything, there's Levi, right? And even more interesting is he was actually a Freemason for all of 1 month. So he was, for anyone who's wondering, because Levi writes about Freemasonry, in most of his works. But he was a Freemason, but he was after all the writing he did about it. So he wrote about Freemasonry without being a Freemason. I guess kind of like, Manly P. Hall, right? He wrote about Freemasonry before becoming a Freemason. But Levi, and I know I'm digressing a little bit here. I think the reason it didn't work out is when he was given the degrees and they asked him to speak at the end of it. And he's like, you all must be so happy that I'm here because now I can explain to you your symbols and the whole reason you're here. You're welcome.
Oh no. How many of us have done that?
So, and,
how many of have done that in our own lodge,
right.
And I was going to say, he probably, some of these guys, it's the same story. They show up and they realize, oh, this is the porch.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It all clicks together and, yeah, but so after he gave another presentation on the transmutational nature of initiation the next month. What's interesting though is at the end of it, of course they open it up to question. There's a Professor Ganaval who's a member of the lodge, and he stands up and he's like, I have a couple of questions and comments about what I just heard. And Levi, he's like, I don't want to take any questions. And he just walks out the door.
I am so glad you got to share that. What an awesome story. That is just, I was fortunate, myself and Cosmo Magliozzi had Rex Hutchins as our mentor down in Tucson, and he was the one that put us on that trail. He's like, you need to look more into this guy. And it was like, just, oh, okay. Yeah. So all these books in here are connected to him. Okay, I got it now.
Yeah, because,
It's amazing.
There used to be this fantastic tradition of ritual magic and esotericism that existed, I would say, leading up until or from the Renaissance. But you see it starts to kind of taper off. I would want to say by the 1800s. And Levi, I feel, is the person who rekindled that flame.
I would agree, 100%. Yeah. With 376 pages of detailed rituals, historical documents, illustrations of jewels and regalia, your book is a treasure trove for Masonic scholars and enthusiasts. What was your process for deciding how much to reveal about the rituals, and how did you balance respecting their sacred nature with making them accessible to a wider audience?
So I have to say that the ritual as it appears in the book is really the full ritual. There's no intentional blinds or anything like that, like some other writers have put in the past, right? And I
Yes.
think it's because there's a different time today. I think people are more open to esoteric subjects, where some of those previous writings, from the 17 and 1800s, had those blinds in it because society wasn't as accepting. And so in here is pretty much as it appears in their personal documents, in their personal copies of the ritual. So nothing is veiled in here. But with that being said, I think it goes back to, the allegories themselves are a veil. And so as you go through it, a lot of this depends on the inner transformation. So I think that's the only secret of this, like most Masonic ritual, is that the ritual itself isn't important. What's important is how it's communicated, the egregore around the ritual, and the result that it achieves within yourself. Because Masonic ritual, you could find everything. You could find our secret words, the grips, all of that's online. But I think even if you have that, if you haven't gone through it, it doesn't have the same change, right? It's knowledge without illumination. And I think that's the important thing here. Rituals like this depend on having that group of people focused, intent on the nature of the work. And that's what causes the transformation, not the words, not the passwords. It's that moment.
You're so right. For me, the most important part of the ritual is keeping it whole, like you did. Thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah.
I hate going through them and going, oh, they broke it right there. Great. Wonderful. Okay. And then also, the key, silence, silence and movement, contemplation, silence and movement, contemplation. That silence is the key, I think, to most of these rituals when you're doing it with a group, and make sure you're with people that can, at those times, still their own thoughts, so that contemplation for that person going through the ritual can really cut through.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's something we miss a lot in Masonic ritual, is that, especially as, some Masonic groups have this feeling like we need to get as many people through as quickly as possible. That's how we're going to save Masonry. And I think it'd be better, and a lot of times, if you would just do a degree, give a person the opportunity to reflect on it, internalize it, then move on. Once they have grasped it, right, and they've had that interchange, then you move on to the next degree. I know there's several observant lodges that do that. And what's amazing about them is they create dedicated Masons who are there for the duration. And unfortunately, though, most Masonic bodies, and I'm not saying anything negative about any of them, I get their reasoning, even if I don't necessarily agree with it. But a lot of times it's like, okay, let's push them through as quickly as possible, make them a dues paying member, and then we'll move on to the next person, right? And here you go. Here's, in Scottish Rite, a lot of times it's like over a day or a weekend, here are the key rituals, Great. You are now a 32nd degree Mason. Fantastic. Have at it. What does it mean? I don't know, but bring in the
Yeah.
next person.
Have you ever read a Hindu text? No. Oh, you should have. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree 100%. We have a beautiful lodge here if you're ever visiting Arizona called Ascension. And, one of the authors, Jimmy Paul Lamb, is a member there. And they create a sacred space, brother. When you walk in, it's all candlelight. I mean, it is, I just love going. It's almost like going to the opera. It is, they do such a wonderful job. Um, let's get into our final question here for the book. So you had me at Solon because when I saw that in there, I was like, okay, I would directly go to that 30. I think it's the 34th. I think I would just dive in right there and see what that is first.
Right.
So the final 9 degrees of the order focus on philosophical knighthood, drawing on figures, like you said, Plato, and Alexander the Great. What do you think these degrees reveal about the order's ultimate purpose? And how do they speak to modern readers seeking meaning and fraternal traditions today?
So these final 9 degrees, these orders of knighthood, were not intended for the average member. They were actually honorary degrees, and as such, you have that they form almost like they have membership limitations, right? So the 36th degree Chevalier of Alexander the Great, you can only have 9 members, right? And those would be the 9 key officers of the Grand Temple. And then the 35th degree, you could have 12, right? Moving on down, you add a little bit more. And so you form a pyramid. So I think these orders of knighthood were, so maybe I'll backtrack a little bit and say, if there's a veiled meaning in here, it's available for the readers. You can read it, but for the members, it would have been that you had to have proven through service to the order your worthiness of receiving these degrees. And because of that, I think these are all, what's interesting is the word they use is these are all based on different law givers, right? So Solon, with his series of laws, Plato with the laws of geometry, and so I think this would be the secret, if there was a secret within the Order of Ishmael, were these final degrees, and I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
What do you think these degrees reveal about the order's ultimate purpose, and how do they speak to modern readers seeking meaning in fraternal traditions today?
Okay. So I think that that what they speak about is almost like the fellowcraft degree, right? It's the addition of knowledge, but in this case, it's the addition of philosophy, right? As you go through, and I think it creates like a structure of this is almost like a hierarchy of leadership, right? As you take in each of these, it helps expand your awareness of different schools of philosophical thought. I think what it brings to modern readers is a lot of the material in here is, it would have been common, right, when this was written in the 1800s, as you went through the English school system, like the teaching on geometry. What's interesting is that, today, like I had to go back, I had to research it. And that's one of the reasons why I have the key to one of the problems they have in here, is because I had to go back to the Euclidean geometry textbooks that actually figure out some of this stuff. But back then, it would have been common knowledge. And I think it helps bring back some of that traditional learning. I think that's what it speaks to modern readers. Even some of the biblical parables in here are some of the more obscure, stories that you hear of. And so as I was going through this, I also had the Bible next to me, because there would be times when I look through and I'm like, oh, is that what it really says? And it's like, yes, it is, right?
Yeah.
So I think that what it has for modern readers is it brings back maybe some of that education that went into the development of these Victorian gentlemen, which did change the world, right? As they spread masonry throughout the world, there was a philosophical background to it. And we don't really get that today because we don't have that common framework to work from. And so I think that may be, as we go through this, we can realize that this would have been the knowledge, the base education that Freemasons had back in the day.
Yes.
And so sometimes we don't think about that in Masonic ritual, that it references some of the stuff that would have been common knowledge.
100%, because they were all reading the Bible. They all were reading the Bible.
Yeah.
All those stories, they were raised on with them. I mean, if you asked them about the prayer of Jabez, they'd be like, yeah, that's manifestation.
And today we don't have that common background. And so I think sometimes in Masonic ritual, things get glossed over that are very important, but we don't even see it because we don't have that perspective.
Well, that leads us. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I cannot wait to dive into your book. Like I said, hopefully when I order one, I can have it shipped to you and I'd love to get a signed copy from you.
Oh, I'd be happy to.
I'm going to start a stack back here of signed copies. All right. So let's get into the main question of this podcast. And it goes, and I thought you would be fantastic for this question because, as you know, ritual is all about communication, so much so. You know, when you see a ritual being done really well, it's almost telepathic. You know, the movements and everything is incredible. How do you think we as human beings can communicate better this day and age?
So I think one of the core principles of this order, to where it's even kind of a subtitle, is the story reconciliation. And I think in communication, that's something we don't look at, is that we can disagree. But at the end of the day, we should realize that we're all moving towards a common goal. And we may approach it from different directions. But the important thing is not the disagreement. The important thing is that unified journey at the end. And I think that's what several of the degrees in here, what they focus on is that reconciliation. You could hate each other. You could feel that each other have destroyed, your lives or whatever. But at the end of the day, you need to put that aside and realize that we're all humans. We all come from this we all have common needs, desires, backgrounds, and they may lead us in a different direction. But at the end, we're all going the same way,
That is beautiful, man. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. All right. So let's jump to our last question here. We live in the year 2025. We know our basic science. We know we're swimming in molecules, and those are a byproduct of the quantum field, which is very mysterious. And then there's something beyond the quantum field that's making the quantum field appear. When you look out at your age right now and your philosophical studies, when you look out here, what do you think is philosophically is actually going on out here?
Yeah, no, I think currently what's going on actually in most aspects that we have in life, it's a crucible, it's a testing. And I think what's going on even in the world at large right now is we have this testing going on, this division that we see. And I think, though, it's going to lead to a transformational space culturally. I think of, so the time when this book was written, or the original rituals, was a very transformational time. It was, and because of that, you saw the growth of spiritualism, and that was a result of, you had the Industrial Revolution that was going on. You had all these scientific advances that were going on, which kind of pushed spirituality to the side for a period of time, in the, I'd say, early to mid 1800s. And so it was a time when the secular took over, right? The world around us, if you're in Kabbalah, Malkuth became dominant. And what happened at the end of that, though, was, I think there was a realization that people started to come to at the same time. And you see it in America with the spiritualist movement. You see it with the Theosophical movement in England, is that people started realizing the spirit is more important than the material. And so we need to focus a little bit more on that. And I think that's what happened during this time. That's why you see so many of the Western mystery schools really flourished during this 1800s, the early 1900s. I think today we kind of have that same thing going on. With the rise of the internet, in this isolation that we've kind of created for ourselves, a lot of people, they're friends. It's no longer a social interaction where you go to the bar together. I mean, some people still do, but most of their interactions are through a phone or through, Xbox or Discord or something like that. It's a very isolated. We've created our own solitude to where we have millions of connections, but we don't really have that personal connection. And so I think that's similar to what was happening in the 1800s with the Industrial Revolution, is that there was this isolation. As you focus more on factory work or what have you, you became isolated. And so I think what's going on today is we're moving towards another turn on that pendulum. And I think philosophically, you're seeing, there's more books today on esoteric topics than I could ever remember happening. There's this resurgence, this renaissance. And I think it's because after isolating ourselves for so many years, we're starting to realize we do need that personal connection. We need that touch. We need to come together. And we need to once again put the spiritual, the philosophical over the material. We're moving from Malkuth into Yesod again, if you would, that foundation, and from there, hopefully expand. The unfortunate thing about that, though, is because it is cyclical. It'll last for a while, and then it'll go right back down. There will be something else that happens that we begin to isolate ourselves and focus more on the material. But I say right now, while we're in it, let's enjoy it.
Yes, the cycles of nature. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I interviewed Greg Dwyer a few weeks ago, and we had this conversation during the interview. It's on the podcast, and he brought up the word biofeedback, and I thought that was great. He goes, "That's what we're missing. We're not connecting in person anymore, so we lose that biofeedback, and the only thing we have left is this person okay? Should I be with this person? Should I be around this person?" Instead of just engaging and being yourself. So yeah, that is so true. That is so true.
Yeah. In this case, maybe it's spiritual feedback, right?
Even better. Oh man. Oh, thank you for saying that. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I cannot thank you enough for being on my podcast. I hope everybody goes out there and gets the book. If you have a Masonic library, this is a must-have for your Masonic library. And I can't wait to dive into it. I know I've got a couple of friends here in Arizona. We might just get together and put this thing to work.
Yeah. Well, let me know. Actually, I have a connection to Arizona. I received my fellowcraft in Master Mason's degree while I was there. I was working at Intel in Chandler. I was a contractor there. And so Chandler Lodge.
I worked there in the 90s.
Oh, yeah. I was there in the late 90s.
C6.
Yep.
Yeah, I was in a lab collecting light on a chip because we were competing for the digital camera.
Okay. Yeah, I was at...
That tells you how long ago that was.
Oh, yeah. When I was there, the Pentium 2 was the big thing. So, yeah. We
were there at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, man. That was when the fab was at like C4, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I was there.
Small world. Wow.
Yeah, I remember that facility was huge. And then they also had the facility in Nakatillo, but I helped run the network and telecom support desk.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
But yeah, Arizona. So while I was there, I had moved there right after I received my entered apprentice degree. So Chandler Lodge, it's now Thunderbird Lodge.
Yep.
They actually conferred my second and third degree as courtesy work. And my brother-in-law still lives there, actually. So I'm more than happy to come out. Give me an invitation. I'm there. I could stay with my brother or, my brother-in-law.
We'll have to do that. My lodge right now is doing, we're focusing on education, and we're bringing brothers in from different states. We've had Daniel Molina fly in from Florida. We flew in Timothy Hogan. We had a couple others come in. So I will put you next on the list. We'll see if we can get some treasure together and bring you out and promote your book and do a presentation. I think that would be fantastic.
All right. Well, I would be honored. Yeah, I appreciate also, and thank you for having me on today. So it's been a pleasure having this conversation.